Shifting sands reflect change that is gradual and never-ending, making it an apt theme for this year's Eval Fest. It was a 3-day evaluation festival that brought together some of the world's finest sector experts, creating a melting pot of ideas, innovations, and insights. We at Sambodhi are deeply committed to bringing these learnings to you, but with a twist of our own. Presenting Evidence Dialogues, a conversation series born out of the many stories that were left uncaptured during the sessions at Eval Fest. With this series, we bring to you a stellar lineup of sector experts talking about their experiences and the countless learnings they've gathered in their journey of bringing transformation. We spoke to Ada, President of International Development Evaluation Association, and talked to her about identifying capacity gaps and developing them in a multi-contextual and multidisciplinary evaluation ecosystem. Stay tuned for the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Ada. It's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure. My entire pleasure.
Thank you so much. My first question was around South, North and South collaborations. We've heard of South-South collaborations, but SNS collaborations are emerging these days. And for any policy to translate into action, what we need is good research. But one of the deterrents of that activity is resource availability, which tends to oscillate a bit. What can SNS collaborations do to strengthen the capacities of these individuals who are working towards translating policy into action?
That's a very good question. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Indeed, South-South collaboration started as a very powerful approach to strengthen capacities. Having said that, there is very little documented about what the impact of that strategy, that approach to South-South cooperation has brought to the table. There is a feeling that has been very positive, but we as evaluators should have some evidence about that. Still, we are moving towards not only South-South, as you have said, but also North, South, Southeast, triangular collaboration, etc., which is very good. And as you rightly mentioned, resources oscillate. So what do we need to really be effective on this and really to transform? Probably we have to do a few things that are different from each other. To me, one important thing is to really demonstrate that these approaches can make a difference. And for that, it's not only a very good conceptual basis, but also to monitor and to evaluate from time to time, to document practices, to document how these research evaluations that we have done has led to policies that are more equitable, that are more just. How are we really influential in doing those kind of things? So that's one thing. How can we actually demonstrate that what we are going to do is effective, and how we actually demonstrate afterwards that this has been effective and others can learn from it. So we need not only to use evidence, but also to generate evidence on what has worked. The other part that I would highlight strongly and has to do with capacity building exactly is to what extent we are looking for new approaches while using the same competencies, so that we expect from evaluators, researchers, and policymakers. I think we need a change there. And what we need to do in terms to build capacities is to incorporate a political dimension. So when we talk about using evidence or influence in policymaking, we are talking about very complex settings where these changes may happen, and these contexts have different dimensions. So we cannot just assume, as probably we have always assumed, that if we have good evidence, we have good data, that will lead to policy decision making. No, it's not mechanical. The political decision takes place in a very complex environment when there is a need for policy dialogue, for negotiations, for identification of champions that actually will allow this data, this evidence to be actually used to influence policies and policies in a very good way. And I think this dimension of having researchers, evaluators that can actually get involved in policy dialogues or can trigger policy dialogues is not being approached. I have reviewed several competencies frameworks and this dimension is not there. And many times it's even avoided from the discussion. So for me, this is the other dimension that I will probably highlight as important.
Right. So not just limiting to the work, doing the work that leads to the policy, but also involvement in terms of developing that policy with the decision makers is what we need as a community.
Exactly.
In that line of thought, we've talked about what is required, but how do we identify the capacity building tools that are required to strengthen good research? What tools do we need to address these capacity building needs as well?
I would say that it's important to also combine competencies-based capacity building with demand-driven. So a combination, finding a balance, because we cannot just assume that people know what their needs are. Of course, they have a general view and they have elements that are important. But if we are telling that we need to be influential and we need to demonstrate that change can happen and we are to document those changes, then probably we're not just in a position to retrieve what the needs-based assessment is. So a needs-based assessment is useful, but we need to go beyond and to develop this competencies framework and to see to what extent the needs assessment really match with the competencies framework that we think it's important for being influential, for being transformative. Therefore, that is something that we need. Go beyond needs assessment and find this balance between what is needed in terms of competencies-based capacity building. The other important thing is to really walk the talk in terms of what actors need to be involved in capacity building efforts. So we're not longer speaking just about evaluators and researchers, but also we're speaking about policymakers, parliamentarians, civil society organizations, academic organizations that come together and are a part of these capacity building, capacity development efforts that we can make. Otherwise, change it will not happen. We will be trapped in a paradigm where we produce the evidence and we will really hope for the evidence to be taken by policymakers and to produce a change. So, summarizing in a nutshell, we need to go beyond needs assessment. We need competencies-based approaches as well, but thinking of them in a system, not as separate or not one predominant vis-a-vis the other. And we need to think in a multi-stakeholder approach, but in a very, very thoughtful way. Because sometimes we go to the extreme saying, oh, we need all the actors together, and we romanticize the concept of community. But we need to know which actors, for which situation, for which purpose, and to what extent this, I would say, this range of factors that we are focusing on will actually help with the purpose we are aiming to get with the capacity building efforts.
Right. Is there an example of where something like this has been achieved?
Yes, I'm thinking now of an example where in 2017 there was the organization of what was called Eval Colombo. Eval Colombo 2018 actually, and the idea was to to make to advocate for parliaments to be more responsible and to embrace the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was lucky to be part of this the organization committee of this event, and we had a lot of thinking on how we can actually make this happen. And for that, we were clear about the parliamentarians and parliaments were a key actor in this undertaking, but were not the only ones. So we needed the government, we needed international organizations, we needed people that were influencers, and we need some activists. And so we carefully thought about what are the range of actors, but in a way that it will not jeopardize the important role that parliaments and parliamentarians were to play. And Eva Colombo was a very successful global event where more than 128, I think, parliamentarians and parliaments participated with the support of other actors. And the Colombo Declaration was signed, but the difference between that declaration and others is that there was a strategy to actually follow up the implementation of the declaration. And many things happened after that, like, for example, the incorporation of evaluation and research in the bylaws of several parliaments, in the proposal of laws, in bills that were actually institutionalized in evaluation, the use of data in parliaments, the increased pressure that parliamentarians were putting on governments to become accountable to the SDGs by using data, by generating evaluation, etc. That is still, we are discussing about that, and in Rabat next week in the Global Evaluation Forum, we will be discussing the results of the declaration and its follow-up and what changes it has contributed.
Other SNS collaborations are often multicultural, multi-contextual, and also multidisciplinary. But managing all these facets can be difficult given the geographical expanse of all this work, right? It's not always possible to even meet physically to get the work done. My question is, how do we ensure that the interests and the capacities of the individuals working are retained and also nurtured at the same time?
Probably there is not one straight answer to that, but I think the importance of the topic needs to be highlighted. And I would say that it's important as to ensure that the individual capacities are enhanced is to link those individual capacities to a second level. It means institutional capacities. So these individuals belong to institutions that also need to be enhanced. So the first level is the individual capacity that has to lead to some changes in the institution. And the institutions should also play a role in influencing policies at a higher level. And of course, that is a challenge, but at the same time, is something that is being done and promoted by some organizations or even some individuals. Importantly is probably not to rely 100% on financial resources, but to rely in some other experience that have happened, that have been documented, that can be exchanged by virtual means, by face-to-face activities. We can also think on peer-to-peer support. For example, in promoting evidence-based voluntary national reviews for Africa. We were there, the Clear Anglophone Africa, governments from Africa, UNICEF and other actors were facing resources constraints, but we were having countries that were willing to go to the neighboring country to share their experiences, to talk with them, to reinforce capacities. But you would say, but that's just South-South collaboration with the peer support. Not necessarily, because this peer support approach was at the same time supported by other organizations that could join in online activities that can monitor, that can trace what is happening. And as important as the process is what the main purpose is, and is to use this experience, to use the evidence in influencing policies. So to ensure that the evidence is produced and used. And it's not just that we as evaluators or researchers, we finish here and then policymakers have to use the evaluation. We have to engage in processes that will lead to that. And for this to happen, when we plan the activities, the capacity building activities, when we plan our evaluation activities, we have to plan how we will reach the stage of influencing policies, influencing policy, and we have to budget for that as well. So we have to budget, even if it's in-kind resources, but we have to budget for that. Many times we do the North-South exchange, we manage to get resources for South-South collaboration, triangular collaboration, and then when it comes to really promote the influence, the decision making, the policy making, we have no money, we didn't plan for that, we have to go back to our countries. So we need to plan for this and ensure that we are influential. Unless we aim to be influential, change might be produced, might not be produced. But what has been our role on that? So we have to be consequent, we have to be systematic to ensure influence takes place with our contribution to the extent possible.
Absolutely. Influence is the key word here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure
My
talking to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.